My stepmother smiled wickedly as the lawyer read my father's will. But when he announced the final clause, her face went white as a sheet and she screamed, "This can't be legal!" The entire room turned to look at me and I simply smiled, knowing that after 15 years of silence, justice was finally mine. If you're watching this, please hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I need to know how far this true story of revenge and justice has reached. Share this with everyone you know, because what happened next will restore your faith that truth always wins. The conference room fell into a deathly silence as Attorney Marcus Chen adjusted his glasses and continued reading. Victoria, my stepmother, sat frozen in her designer chair, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the armrests. Her two sons, Brandon and Kyle, exchanged nervous glances, their usual arrogant smirks vanishing. I sat quietly in the corner, my hands folded in my lap, feeling my father's presence in that room as if he were standing right beside me, finally telling the truth he'd been forced to hide for so long. And to my daughter, "Emma Hartley," Marcus read, his voice echoing through the oak-paneled room, "I leave not only 50% of all my assets, properties and business shares, but also this letter, to be read aloud in the presence of all beneficiaries." Victoria shot up from her chair like a rocket, her face twisted with rage. "This is impossible. Richard promised me everything. That girl has no right." Marcus raised his hand, his expression stern. "Mrs. Hartley, if you interrupt again, I will have security escort you out, and you will forfeit your right to hear the complete terms of the will." She sat back down, but her eyes burned with a hatred I'd seen countless times before. This was the woman who had turned my teenage years into a living nightmare, who had slowly poisoned my father's mind against me, who had made me feel like a stranger in my own home. But my father, in his final days, had seen through her mask, and now, from beyond the grave, he was setting everything right. Let me take you back to where it all began. To the day my world shattered into a million pieces. I was 13 years old, sitting in my pink bedroom doing homework, when I heard my mother's scream. It was a sound I'll never forget, a sound that still wakes me up at night. I ran downstairs to find her collapsed on the kitchen floor, my father desperately calling for an ambulance, his hands shaking as he tried to help her breathe. "Pancreatic cancer," the doctor said later. "Stage 4. She had 6 months, maybe less. Those 6 months were the longest and shortest of my life. I watched my beautiful, vibrant mother fade away, her laughter replaced by groans of pain, her bright eyes dimming with each passing day. My father barely left her side, holding her hand through every treatment, every sleepless night. And I, a scared 13-year-old girl, learned what real love looked like, even as I was losing it forever. The day we buried my mother, the rain fell so hard it felt like the sky was crying with us. I stood by her grave, clutching a single white rose, feeling like half of my heart had been ripped out and buried with her. My father stood beside me, his strong shoulders shaking with sobs, and I remember thinking that we would grieve together, that we would hold on to each other and somehow survive this unbearable loss. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong, because just 8 months later, Victoria Blackwood walked into our lives like a beautiful, poisonous snake. My father met her at a business conference in Manhattan. Victoria was a stunning woman in her early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and a smile that could light up a room. She was a widow, she claimed, with 2 teenage sons from her previous marriage. She seemed understanding about my father's grief, patient with his emotional distance, and kind to me whenever he was around. But I saw something in her eyes, something cold and calculating that made my skin crawl. I tried to tell my father, but he was lonely, vulnerable, desperate to fill the void my mother had left. 6 months after they met, Victoria became my stepmother. The change happened slowly at first, like a disease spreading through our home. Victoria would make small comments about my mother's things still being around. Richard, don't you think it's time to move on? All these photos and mementos, they're just keeping you stuck in the past. One by one, my mother's belongings began to disappear. Her favorite vase gone. Her paintings from the walls removed. Even her wedding photo on my father's desk was replaced with a new picture of him and Victoria. I protested, I cried, I begged my father to see what was happening, but he would just pat my head and say, "Emma, Victoria's right. We need to make new memories now." Victoria's sons moved in next, and they were just like their mother, cruel beneath a polished surface. Brandon was 17, tall and athletic, popular at school, and he delighted in making my life miserable. He'd steal my homework, lock me out of the bathroom before school, and spread rumors that I was unstable because of my mother's death. Kyle was 15, quieter but more vicious in his own way. He'd move my things, hide my books, and then watch with a smirk as I frantically searched for them, knowing I'd be late for class. At dinner, Victoria would ask them about their day with such warmth, such interest, while barely acknowledging my presence. "How was soccer practice, Brandon? Oh, Emma, did you even go to school today? You look so disheveled." My father changed too, or maybe Victoria changed him. The man who used to read me bedtime stories and help me with science projects became distant, distracted, always busy with work or with his new wife. Victoria made sure of that, scheduling elaborate vacations during my school breaks, planning romantic dinners on my birthday, always finding ways to keep him away from me. When I tried to talk to him alone, she'd appear like magic, sliding her arm through his, reminding him of some urgent matter they needed to discuss. I felt invisible in my own home, a ghost haunting rooms that no longer wanted me. The worst part was how Victoria played the victim. Whenever I tried to stand up for myself, she'd burst into tears, running to my father with stories of how disrespectful I was, how ungrateful, how I was trying to come between them. "Richard, I've tried so hard to love that girl, but she hates me. She's still so angry about her mother. She can't let anyone else in." My father would come to my room, his face tired and disappointed, and lecture me about giving Victoria a chance, about being part of the family. I felt like I was drowning and everyone was watching me sink, telling me to just try harder to swim. By the time I turned 16, I had learned to make myself small, to stay quiet, to survive. I spent most of my time in my room or at the library, avoiding family dinners, avoiding Victoria's cold eyes and her son's cruel jokes. I threw myself into my studies, determined that education would be my escape route. My grades were perfect, my SAT scores exceptional, and I had dreams of going to college far away from that house of lies and manipulation. But Victoria had other plans. One night, I overheard her talking to my father in his study, her voice sweet as honey but laced with poison. "Richard, honey, I've been thinking about Emma's college plans. Do you really think it's wise to spend so much money on an expensive university? She's clearly not emotionally stable, and Brandon and Kyle also need to think about their futures. Maybe Emma could go to community college locally, live at home, help out around the house. It would be so much more affordable, and she could save money for later." I pressed my ear against the door, my heart pounding, waiting for my father to defend me, to say that of course his daughter would go to the best school possible. But instead, I heard him sigh and say, "You might be right, Victoria. Emma hasn't seemed very focused lately. Maybe staying local would be better for her." That night, alone in my room, I cried until I had no tears left. Then I made a decision. I would not let Victoria destroy my future the way she'd destroyed my present. I applied for every scholarship I could find, worked 2 part-time jobs, saved every penny. And when my acceptance letter from Columbia University came, along with a full scholarship, I didn't tell anyone until the day before I left. The look on Victoria's face when I announced it at dinner was worth every sleepless night I'd endured. "You did what? Richard, did you know about this?" My father looked shocked, confused, But underneath I saw something else, a flicker of the pride he used to show when I brought home good grades. Emma, that's wonderful. I had no idea you were even applying. I moved to New York City that fall, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. I threw myself into my studies, made real friends, discovered who I was without Victoria's shadow looming over me. I called my father once a week, and our conversations were stiff and awkward, always with Victoria hovering nearby, always cut short by some urgent matter she needed him for. But I had escaped, and that was enough. Or so I thought. During my junior year, my father started calling me more frequently, and his voice sounded different, tired, older. Emma, how are you? Are you eating well? Studying hard? He'd ask about my classes, my friends, my life, with a genuine interest I hadn't heard in years. I was cautious at first, wondering if this was another one of Victoria's manipulations, but something felt different. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November, cold rain pelting my dorm room window. Emma, it's your father. I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. His voice was shaking, and immediately my body went cold. The doctors found something. It's lung cancer, stage 3. I'm starting treatment next week. The world tilted sideways. My father, my strong, invincible father who'd survived losing my mother, was sick. Really sick. I'm coming home, I said immediately. No, he replied firmly. You have exams coming up. You focus on school. I'll be fine. Victoria's taking good care of me. But Victoria wasn't taking good care of him. Over the next few months, as I made frequent trips home between classes, I saw the truth. My father was deteriorating rapidly, but it wasn't just the cancer. Victoria had taken control of everything. His medications, his doctor's appointments, his finances, even who could visit him. She'd moved him into the master bedroom upstairs, claiming it was quieter, but I realized it was to isolate him. When I tried to visit, she'd meet me at the door with excuses. He's sleeping, Emma. The doctors say he needs rest. Maybe come back next week? I'd peer past her, trying to see up the stairs, and sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of my father. Thinner, paler, looking lost in his own home. One day, I didn't call first. I drove straight from New York and arrived at noon, letting myself in with my old key that miraculously still worked. Victoria was out, Brandon and Kyle were at work, and the house was silent. I found my father alone in his room, lying in bed staring at the ceiling. When he saw me, tears immediately filled his eyes. Emma, my girl, I've missed you so much. I sat beside him, taking his frail hand in mine, and he looked at me with such sadness, such regret. I've been a terrible father to you. I let her turn me against you. I was so lost after your mother died, and Victoria, she seemed like a lifeline. But I realize now she was an anchor dragging me down, pulling me away from the only family that mattered, you. We talked for hours that day, really talked for the first time in years. He told me everything, how Victoria had manipulated him, isolated him from his friends, taken control of his business, convinced him to change his will multiple times, always ensuring she and her sons would get more and more. She doesn't love me, Emma. She never did. She loves my money, my house, my status, and I was too blind and too stupid to see it. He gripped my hand tighter, his voice urgent. But I'm not stupid anymore. I've hired a new lawyer, someone Victoria doesn't know about. I'm fixing this, Emma. I'm fixing everything. Over the next few months, I visited as often as I could, and each time, my father and I grew closer, rebuilding what Victoria had almost destroyed. He was too weak now for treatment. The cancer had spread too far, and we both knew time was running out. But we made the most of it, looking through old photo albums of my mother, talking about my childhood, making plans for my future that he wouldn't be around to see. Your mother would be so proud of you, he'd say, tears streaming down his face. And I'm proud of you too. You survived when I failed to protect you. You're stronger than both of us. Victoria grew increasingly hostile as she realized she was losing control. She'd barge into the room during our visits, claiming my father needed his medication, needed rest, needed privacy. But now my father would look her straight in the eye and say firmly, "Victoria, leave us alone. Emma is my daughter, and she has every right to be here." The mask was slipping, and Victoria knew it. She'd storm out, and I could hear her yelling at Brandon and Kyle downstairs, making frantic phone calls, pacing like a caged animal, realizing the cage door was closing. My father died on a Sunday morning in May, just as the cherry blossoms were blooming outside his window. I was holding his hand, reading him his favorite Hemingway novel, when his breathing simply stopped. It was peaceful, quiet, and I knew my mother was waiting for him somewhere beyond. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Go be with Mom. I'll be okay now." "You made sure of that." Victoria came in minutes later, her face showing what I'm sure she thought was appropriate grief, but I saw the calculation in her eyes, the wheels turning, already planning her next move. "Poor Richard," she sobbed dramatically. "He was so sick at the end. Thank goodness he had me to care for him. The funeral was a circus." Victoria played the devastated widow perfectly, dressed in black couture, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, accepting condolences from my father's business associates with practiced grace. Brandon and Kyle flanked her like bodyguards, and together they presented the picture of a grieving family. I stood apart, alone, watching this theatrical performance, knowing that soon, very soon, the curtain would fall and the real show would begin. After the burial, Victoria announced loudly that the will reading would take place in 1 week at the office of her family attorney. "Richard left very specific instructions," she said, looking directly at me with barely concealed triumph. "We'll all learn his final wishes together." That week was the longest of my life. I stayed in a hotel, unable to bear another night under Victoria's roof. I received a call from Marcus Chen, the lawyer my father had secretly hired, asking me to meet him privately before the official reading. In his office, Marcus handed me a thick envelope with my father's handwriting on the front. "Your father wanted you to read this first, Emma. He said it would help you understand everything." I opened it with trembling hands and began to read my father's final letter to me. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're about to face Victoria one last time. I need you to know the truth about everything. The truth I discovered too late but managed to document completely. Victoria Blackwood is not who she claimed to be. She was never a widow. Her husband is very much alive, living in Florida with their actual children. Brandon and Kyle are not her sons from a previous marriage. They're her nephews, paid actors in her elaborate con. Your stepmother, my wife, is a professional con artist who has done this before, 4 times to be exact, marrying wealthy widowers, isolating them from their families, taking control of their assets, and then either divorcing them or waiting for them to die." I couldn't breathe. The words swam before my eyes. My father continued, "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago, and the evidence is overwhelming. The investigator found her real identity, her criminal record under a different name, even photos of her with her real husband, planning her next target while still married to me. I've compiled everything, bank statements showing her transferring money to offshore accounts, emails between her and her husband discussing their scheme, recordings of her coaching Brandon and Kyle on how to treat you, how to make you look unstable so I'd cut you out of the will. She almost succeeded, Emma. For years I believed her lies about you. But in these final months I saw her for who she really is, and I knew I had to protect you, even if I couldn't do it while I was alive." The letter went on, explaining how he'd worked with Marcus to create an ironclad will, one that would expose Victoria's fraud and ensure she got nothing. I left her just enough to make her think she'd won $1 million, contingent on her staying for the full reading of the will. Because the real justice comes at the end, when Marcus reads the final clause, the one where all her crimes are exposed, where the police will be waiting to arrest her for fraud, identity theft, and attempted murder. My hands froze. Attempted murder? Yes, Emma. I know it sounds insane, but the investigator found evidence that Victoria was slowly poisoning me, speeding up my death so she could inherit sooner. The doctors confirmed it. They found elevated levels of arsenic in my blood. That's why I deteriorated so quickly. She was killing me, and she would have gotten away with it if I hadn't finally woken up. I sat in Marcus's office, my whole body shaking, reading and rereading my father's words. This woman, who I'd thought was just cruel and greedy, was actually a murderer, a calculating, cold-blooded criminal who had destroyed my teenage years as part of a con, who had killed my father for money. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever felt, but mixed with it was something else, relief. Relief that my father had finally seen the truth. Relief that he'd loved me all along, even when he couldn't show it. Relief that he was protecting me one final time. The day of the will reading arrived. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress my mother would have liked, and pulled my hair back in a neat bun. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw my mother's eyes staring back at me, strong and clear. "This is for both of us," I whispered. "For all the years she stole from our family." Marcus had arranged for plainclothes police officers to be present, disguised as law clerks and assistants. The conference room was packed. Victoria sat at the head of the table like a queen, already acting as if she owned everything. Brandon and Kyle lounged nearby, looking bored and entitled. My father's business partners sat quietly, uncomfortable with the obvious tension. And I sat in the corner, silent, waiting. Marcus began reading. The initial bequests were small, personal items to friends, donations to charities my father supported. Then came the main assets. To my wife Victoria, I leave the sum of $1 million to be paid in full immediately upon completion of this reading. Victoria's face lit up, but I could see the greed in her eyes. She wanted more. Marcus continued. The family home, all business holdings, stocks, bonds, and remaining liquid assets are divided as follows. 50% to my beloved daughter Emma Hartley, and 50% to be placed in a trust managed by Emma for charitable purposes in my late wife Margaret's name. Victoria went very still. Brandon sat up straight. Kyle's mouth fell open. What? Victoria's voice was ice. That's impossible. Richard promised me this house. He promised me the company. Where's my inheritance? Marcus looked at her calmly. Mrs. Hartley, you just received $1 million. That is your inheritance. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. $1 million? After everything I did? After years of caring for that man? This is fraud! I'll contest this will. I'll tie this up in courts for years. Marcus raised his hand again. Please, Mrs. Hartley, there's more. I need to read a letter from Mr. Hartley to be shared with everyone present. The room fell silent. Marcus opened another envelope, and my father's voice seemed to fill the space through Marcus's reading. To everyone gathered here, I need you to know that I am of sound mind as I write this, confirmed by 3 independent physicians. I need you to know that everything I'm about to say is truth, backed by evidence that my lawyer will now present. The woman sitting at this table, who calls herself Victoria Hartley, is a fraud and a murderer. The room exploded. Victoria jumped up screaming, "This is slander! You can't—" But Marcus continued, his voice cutting through her protests. Her real name is Victoria Manning. She's wanted in 3 states for identity fraud and embezzlement. She has done this before, marrying 4 other wealthy widowers, conning them out of their money, and then disappearing. Brandon and Kyle are not her sons. They're her nephews, paid accomplices in her scheme. And finally, medical evidence shows that Victoria was poisoning me with arsenic, slowly killing me to speed up her inheritance. The plainclothes officers revealed themselves, moving toward Victoria. She looked around wildly, her perfect facade completely shattered, her face twisted with rage and fear. You have no proof. This is a setup. Richard was senile at the end, you all know that. But Marcus pulled out a thick binder, dropping it on the table with a heavy thud. This contains bank records, emails, photographs, witness statements, medical reports, and recorded conversations. Everything your husband discovered about you and documented meticulously. He may have been dying, Mrs. Manning, but his mind was perfectly clear. Brandon tried to run, but an officer blocked the door. Kyle was frozen in his chair, his face white as paper. Victoria made one last desperate attempt, turning to the assembled business partners. Please, you all knew Richard. He loved me. He wouldn't do this. That girl poisoned his mind against me. But they were all staring at her with disgust, moving their chairs away from her as if she were contaminated. One of my father's oldest friends, Mr. Peterson, stood up, his voice shaking with anger. Richard called me 2 months before he died. He told me everything, Victoria, or whatever your name is. He told me what you'd done to Emma, how you'd isolated him, how you were stealing from the company. We've been investigating the business accounts, and we found where you funneled almost $2 million to offshore accounts. You're done! The police moved in then, handcuffing Victoria as she screamed and cursed, her mask completely gone, revealing the monster underneath. That old fool deserved it. He was weak and pathetic, and that bratty daughter of his deserved everything she got. I earned this money! I earned it! They dragged her out, still screaming, and arrested Brandon and Kyle, too, for conspiracy and fraud. The conference room slowly emptied, people shaking their heads, murmuring about the shocking revelations. Soon it was just Marcus and me, sitting in the sudden silence. Your father was very brave, Marcus said quietly. When he first came to me, he was already very sick, but he was determined to protect you and expose her. He worked on this for months, meeting with investigators, documenting everything, making sure it was all ironclad. He said he owed you 15 years of protection he failed to provide. I felt tears streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were relief, grief, and love all mixed together. He finally came back to me, I whispered. At the end, he finally came back. The trial was sensational. Victoria's true identity was exposed. She was indeed Victoria Manning, a con artist with a criminal record stretching back 20 years. She'd targeted wealthy widowers, used the same playbook every time. Fake widow backstory, attractive accomplices posing as her sons, isolation of the target from their real family, financial manipulation, and, when possible, murder by slow poisoning to speed up the inheritance. My father was her 5th victim, but I was determined he'd be her last. The evidence my father had gathered was overwhelming. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict her on all counts, including attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison without parole. Brandon and Kyle got 10 years each as accomplices. I sat in the courtroom every single day of that trial, watching Victoria's mask finally shatter completely. She aged 10 years in those weeks, her beauty fading as her true nature showed through. On the day of sentencing, as they led her away, she looked directly at me and spat. You think you've won? You're still the pathetic little girl who couldn't keep her father's love. I smiled at her, calm and serene, and replied, No, Victoria. I'm the daughter who got it back. And you're the one going to prison. I'd say I won. The aftermath took months to sort out. My father's company had to be reorganized. The money Victoria had stolen was traced and recovered, and the house needed to be cleansed of her presence. I hired a crew to completely redecorate, removing every trace of Victoria's style and bringing back my mother's warmth. I found boxes in the attic that Victoria had hidden away, full of my mother's belongings, photographs, jewelry, letters. She'd told my father she'd donated them, but really she'd just stashed them away, probably planning to sell them later. I spent weeks going through everything, crying over wedding photos, reading love letters my parents had written to each other, finding my old report cards that my mother had saved with pride. I graduated from Columbia with honors, and I used my inheritance to start a foundation in my mother's name, helping children who've lost parents and are being raised by step-parents or guardians. I wanted to turn my pain into something positive, to help kids who might be suffering like I did. The foundation provides counseling, legal advocacy, and support groups. In the first year alone, we helped over 300 children. And every time I meet a kid who's been neglected or abused by a step-parent, every time I can help them find safety and justice, I feel like I'm honoring both my parents. The house, my childhood home, became difficult for me to live in alone. Too many ghosts, both good and bad. So I sold it and bought a smaller place closer to the city, modern and bright, with no memories attached. But I kept my old bedroom furniture, the pieces my mother had picked out, and I hung our family photos everywhere. 3 generations of Hartleys, survivors all. My father's business partners offered me a position on the board of directors, acknowledging that I was Richard Hartley's daughter and deserved a say in the company he'd built. I accepted, determined to learn the business, to understand what my father had spent his life building. There are still hard days. Days when I miss my father so much it physically hurts. When I think about all the years we lost to Victoria's manipulation, all the conversations we didn't have, all the birthdays and graduations and ordinary moments that were stolen from us. But then I remember those final months, when he came back to me, when we rebuilt our relationship, when he proved his love in the most powerful way possible, by protecting me even after his death. That has to be enough. It has to be. I visit their graves every Sunday, my mother's and my father's, side by side now as they should be. I bring fresh flowers, usually roses because my mother loved roses, and I sit on the bench nearby and tell them about my week. About the foundation, about the kids we're helping, about my life that's finally my own. You'd be proud, I tell them. I'm happy now. Really happy. And Victoria will never hurt anyone again. You made sure of that, Dad. You finally protected our family. Last month, I got a letter from Victoria. She's in a maximum security women's prison upstate, and somehow she got my address. The letter was full of accusations and justifications, claiming she'd really loved my father, that I'd brainwashed him, that she was the real victim here. I read it once, laughed at the absurdity, and then burned it. She has no power over me anymore. She's just a bitter, aging woman in a prison cell, facing 3.5 decades of consequences for her actions. Meanwhile, I'm living the life my parents wanted for me, surrounded by real love, doing meaningful work, honoring their memory. The lesson I learned through all of this is that justice may not be swift, but it's possible. Evil people like Victoria count on their victims staying silent, staying isolated, staying scared. But when you find your voice, when you gather your evidence, when you stand up and fight, the truth has a power that no amount of manipulation can overcome. My father found his voice at the end, and he used it to save me. And now I use my voice to save others. If you're watching this and you're in a situation like I was, where a step-parent or guardian is abusing you, isolating you, or manipulating your family, please know that you're not alone. Document everything. Keep records. Talk to trusted adults outside the home. Don't give up hope. Justice exists, and truth matters. And there are people who will fight for you. It took me years to escape, but I did escape, and so can you. This story is true, every word of it. Names and some details have been changed to protect privacy, but the core truth remains. Victoria Manning is serving her sentence, my father's legacy is secure, and I'm finally free. Free from fear, free from manipulation, free to be the person my parents raised me to be. And that freedom, that justice, was worth every painful step of the journey. Right now, if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it gave you hope, I need you to do something. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories like this, and most importantly, comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've experienced something similar. Tell me what you think about Victoria's sentence. Was it enough? Should it have been more? I read every single comment, and your stories, your thoughts, your support, they matter. Share this video with everyone you know because someone out there might need to hear that justice is possible. That truth wins, that they can survive and thrive despite the cruelest circumstances. On the screen right now, you'll see 2 more stories from this channel. Stories of revenge, justice, and triumph over those who thought they could destroy us. I promise they'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey, for witnessing my truth, for being part of this community where we believe in justice and support survivors. God bless you all. And remember, courage and truth will always lead us to better days. Always.